this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a definitive intelligence bulletin from May 28, 2026, which details exactly why the foundational rules of supply chain management have permanently changed. Look, if your team is still operating on pre-2020 logic, the ground has completely shifted right under your feet.
Remember the playbook from 2010 to 2019? Back then, the entire focus was on low volatility, lean operations, and just-in-time delivery. Well, that globalization-friendly world, it's gone. Our new operating reality is defined by chronic, multi-vector shocks. It demands strategic buffer stocks and execution AI. The strategies that worked beautifully in the last decade were completely rational for a stable world, but we just aren't living in that world anymore.
So how do we survive this structural shift? We're going to break it down into 5 critical pillars: seismic supply shocks, digital freight maturity, maritime choke points, the return of buffer stocks, and AI execution.
Let's jump straight into pillar number 1, navigating seismic supply shocks. Here's the reality. Overlapping shocks mean our old resilience frameworks, the ones designed for single-event recovery, are now dangerously inadequate. Case in point, even when the market breathes a collective sigh of relief over a fragile U.S.-Iran truce, roughly 20% of global oil supply still transits the Strait of Hormuz. That single flow ties directly into freight cost volatility, manufacturing inputs, and cold chain expenses worldwide. A temporary ceasefire absolutely does not remove the structural vulnerability. It remains one of the highest consequence single points of failure in global trade.
Organizations have to stop treating a nominal ceasefire as a resolved risk, period. It is time to map out exactly what happens to your network when multiple geopolitical disruptions hit at the exact same time. You need to model your exposure to a 15 to 25% energy cost spike. You should be reviewing your Middle East marine insurance terms right now because premium adjustments can easily slap an extra 4% onto your total landed costs. And critically, you need to diversify suppliers beyond East Asia while pushing visibility all the way down to your Tier 2 and Tier 3 suppliers.
Moving right along to Section 2, digital freight reaches maturity.
So how is procurement actually adapting to all these shocks? Look no further than the massive Q1 2026 earnings beat from Freightos. This was our absolute clearest signal yet that enterprise shippers are no longer treating digital platforms as a break glass in case of emergency backup plan. They are embedding them as primary channels. By delivering this massive earnings beat in a normalizing freight market, digital platforms prove their revenue model is completely decoupled from traditional rate cycle volatility. The category has officially crossed the structural adoption threshold. It's true market infrastructure now.
If your procurement team wants to survive in this two-tier carrier market, here's what you need to do this quarter. First, audit the lanes you are still booking through legacy brokers, the ones relying on opacity to keep their margins high. Second, run a parallel digital platform test on those exact same lanes. And third, lock it in by integrating your freight platform's API straight into your ERP or TMS. That gives you automated rate comparisons right at the point of booking. Tech-integrated operators are scooping up volume, and legacy operators are bleeding it.
Okay, let's look at Section 3, hidden maritime supply choke points.
While the digital routing side of things is maturing, the physical ships themselves are facing a really quiet, really serious crisis. The global ship spares and equipment market is surging at a 4.4% compound annual growth rate. Why is that? Because massive fleet expansions from the world's top shipbuilders are drastically outpacing our capacity to actually supply the components. A vessel sitting idle because it lacks a critical spare part isn't just a basic maintenance headache anymore. It is a major supply chain disruption waiting to happen.
You also have to factor in the heavy concentration of the shipbuilders themselves. Think about South Korea's dominance in high-end shipbuilding, kind of like Taiwan's hold on semiconductor manufacturing. This kind of concentration is a massive risk. With component lead times stretching well beyond 60 days, you have to build strategic buffer stock for critical vessel parts. And honestly, you urgently need to review your ocean carrier relationships. If they are running aging fleets with deferred maintenance, that unplanned downtime will cascade directly into major port delays and massive freight rate spikes for you.
Which brings us right into Section 4, the return of buffer stocks. This entire spare parts issue is pushing executive procurement leaders to completely rethink the true cost of a lean supply chain. We have to redefine buffer stocks. The old lean model was great at measuring the carrying cost of holding inventory, but it completely ignored the catastrophic revenue loss of a 30-day stockout or a completely halted production line. When you actually model it against those massive disruption costs, strategic buffer inventory for high-risk SKUs delivers a positive ROI, even when things are operating normally. It's not balance sheet waste anymore. It's an insurance policy with a calculable premium.
And the CFOs are finally backing this transition, which is huge. We're moving away from that blunt, old-school philosophy of static, category-wide safety stock that is completely blind to supplier risk. Instead, we're seeing a shift toward dynamic resilience. This means using intelligent, AI-driven demand forecasting to size your buffers dynamically, right down to the individual SKU level, while actively pulling in real-time geopolitical risk scores.
And that perfectly sets up our fifth and final section, AI execution takes the wheel. We are witnessing the evolution of supply chain tech moving from passive observation to active intervention. Basic visibility, that's just table stakes today. 5 years ago, just seeing what was happening in your network was revolutionary. But today, it just surfaces an insight and then sits there waiting for a human to do something about it. The new competitive battleground is execution AI. This is tech that doesn't just flag an issue, it can autonomously reroute a shipment, adjust your downstream production, and update customer commitments in a matter of minutes. It completely compresses your time to response.
The window to adapt to this is closing incredibly fast. Within 30 days, we're seeing major vendors roll out these autonomous features. By 90 days, the early adopters are already reporting measurable improvements in exception response times. Fast forward to 2028, and any organization that fails to adopt execution AI and define their autonomous decision-making boundaries is going to face a severe 3 to 5% gross margin disadvantage against their tech-enabled competitors.
The primary barrier here, it's not actually the software, it's organizational change. You need to sit down and map your current supply chain decision inventory and explicitly define your autonomous decision envelope. Ask your team, what can the AI do completely independently and what absolutely requires a human sign-off? Start piloting this right now on high-frequency, low-consequence decisions, like carrier selection on spot lanes. And start training your human planners to supervise the AI, rather than forcing them to do all the manual execution themselves.
I want to leave you with one final, critical question to help assess your true operational readiness for a world where uncertainty is basically a permanent condition. Your supply chain might be visible, but can it act autonomously before the next shock hits? Because the organizations building those capabilities right now are the ones who will capture the advantage in this new era. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.